My name is Mia Lawson. I am 32 years old, a structural engineer at an urban design firm in downtown Los Angeles, and exactly 21 days ago, the woman who gave birth to me, Renee Calloway, a high-end Bel Air real estate broker who had spent 2 decades cultivating a life that looked immaculate from the outside, did something I still cannot explain to anyone who believes in the basic decency of a mother's love. My father, Dennis Lawson, died on a Tuesday morning, and Renee knew by noon that same day because the hospital still had her listed as his emergency contact from their 9 years of marriage, and she held that information in silence for 72 hours, 3 full days, while I went to work, answered client emails, sat in traffic, ate dinner alone in my apartment on Vermont Avenue, with absolutely no idea that the only person who had ever truly loved me was already lying in a cold hospital morgue. She didn't call. She didn't text. She spent those 3 days in meetings with lawyers, calculating the value of everything he had left behind. And when those lawyers finally arrived in her glass-walled living room in the hills, they came with a stack of documents designed to strip me of every penny my father had spent 30 years quietly and patiently building for me. If you've ever been left out of something that was yours by right, hit that like right now and go ahead and subscribe, because this story is only just beginning, and what my father built in silence is going to change everything. Now let me take you back 25 years. To understand the full weight of what happened in that glass-walled room in the hills of Bel Air, and to understand why I didn't tremble when those lawyers pushed their papers across the table toward me, I need to take you back to the day my parents' marriage collapsed. The day a family court judge in Los Angeles brought his gavel down with a sound that I remember to this day as something close to a gunshot, splitting my childhood in 2 unequal and jagged pieces that would take me the better part of my adult life to fully account for. I was 7 years old. My father, Dennis Lawson, was a master woodworker, a craftsman who ran a small custom furniture shop out of a rented unit in Culver City, a man whose hands were perpetually rough with sawdust and cedar oil, who spoke his love not through words, but through the mortise and tenon joints of a handmade cabinet, through the smooth, patient sanding of a piece of oak that he would shape over weeks into something permanent and beautiful, something built to outlast the man who made it. He was a person of quiet dignity and total honesty, and those qualities, as it turned out, made him completely unprepared for what my mother brought into that courtroom. Renee Calloway, Renee Sterling at the time, came from a family with old real estate money and the kind of social connections that translate directly into legal firepower. She arrived with a team of Century City attorneys who knew how to dismantle a man's credibility with the methodical efficiency of a demolition crew, expensively, systematically, and without sentiment. My father had no money for that kind of representation. He had a workshop, a Ford pickup, and the sincere belief that honesty would be sufficient. It wasn't. When the divorce was finalized, he lost almost everything in a settlement that felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a robbery conducted under fluorescent lighting, presided over by a system that had no mechanism for valuing what he was actually bringing to the table. Renee walked away with the house in Culver City, full legal custody, and a financial settlement that left my father with 2 weekends a month and a 1-bedroom apartment in Inglewood that smelled permanently of wood glue and the particular kind of grief that a man carries when he has given away everything he owned in exchange for the right to hold on to a sliver of his daughter's childhood. I remember the last time he dropped me off at my mother's house after one of those weekends. The sky over the San Fernando Valley settling into that deep blue purple that only exists in Southern California in the final minutes before dark. He knelt on the sidewalk outside our house, his calloused hands stained dark with walnut oil, settling with a gentleness that seemed at odds with their roughness on my small shoulders. And he looked at me with eyes that were glistening in a way I was too young to have a name for. "Remember this, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and steady, despite everything it was costing him to be steady. "No matter what anyone tells you, I am always here. I will always love you." I didn't understand then that those were the words of a man who had just surrendered his entire financial foundation, every dollar he had, the house, the savings account, everything, in order to keep those 2 weekends with me. I found that out 25 years later, reading a letter by lamplight in his workshop, with the sound of the California wind in the trees outside. A year after the divorce, Renee remarried. Marcus Calloway entered our lives with the effortless, commanding presence that comes from running a private equity firm. Suits from a Wilshire Boulevard tailor, a blacked-out Range Rover that he cycled through every 2 years, and a daughter named Brooke from his first marriage, a girl who had been groomed from birth to inhabit a world of lacrosse tournaments, debutante events, and Ivy League acceptance letters. A girl whose entire existence seemed purpose-built to illustrate the distance between what she was and what I was. Overnight, our family had a new structure, a new hierarchy, and a set of unspoken rules about who occupied the center of the room and who was expected to remain quietly at the edges. Marcus never raised his voice at me. He never said anything overtly hostile, nothing that would leave a mark that could be pointed to later. What he did was far more efficient than cruelty. He simply acted as if I did not exist, the way you ignore a piece of furniture that doesn't fit the room's current aesthetic and that no one has gotten around to removing yet. At the dinner parties Renee and Marcus hosted for their real estate contacts and finance clients, evenings where the wine on the table cost more than my father's weekly rent in Inglewood, my mother would move through the room with the practiced warmth of someone performing a role she had fully inhabited, and she would make introductions with the smooth confidence of a woman who has always known which version of herself to present. "This is my husband Marcus," she would say, her voice bright with a specific kind of social pleasure. "And this is Brooke. She just got early admission to Georgetown." And then, almost as a footnote, in the slightly flatter register of someone remembering an obligation rather than announcing a person, "Oh, and Mia. She's mine from my first marriage." Every single time, without variation, I felt something in me become smaller and more transparent, as if I were slowly being edited out of a story that was not large enough to contain me. I learned out of pure self-preservation to become invisible in that house, to make no claims, take up no more space than was strictly necessary, generate no friction that might result in comparison, because comparison was the one game I had no hope of winning on their terms. But invisibility extracted its price slowly, in small daily installments that I didn't fully account for until much later. When I was 16 and needed $40 for an AP Calculus textbook at the USC bookstore, I asked my mother one morning while she was scrolling through a listing on her iPad at the kitchen island, and she responded without looking up. "Ask your father," she said, with the flat, practiced ease of someone reciting a pre-established policy. "That's his responsibility." That same week, Marcus had a brand new white Jeep Wrangler delivered to the house with an enormous red bow on the hood for Brooke's 18th birthday, and the entire family gathered on the front lawn in the morning to watch her react. The sound, the photographs, the champagne Renee opened at 11 in the morning. And I watched from my bedroom window. And then I closed the blinds and started looking for a part-time job. I found one scrubbing prep stations at a diner on Pico Boulevard after school. And on weekends, I cut lawns for 3 neighbors on our block in the 95-degree San Fernando Valley heat. Every dollar I made feeling like a quiet and private act of rebellion. A single brick laid in the foundation of a future I was constructing, entirely without their permission or their assistance. Marcus noticed, the way people like Marcus notice everything that confirms what they already believe about the world. One evening, I was climbing the stairs with my work shoes still damp from the diner shift, and I heard his voice drifting out through the half-open kitchen door. Unhurried, conversational, the voice of a man who doesn't bother modulating his volume because it has never occurred to him that someone he's discussing might be within earshot. "She is exactly like her father," he said. "Some people are just built for that kind of work, Renee. Manual labor, service industry. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just what certain people are suited for. That's not a criticism. It's an observation." I stopped on the stairs and didn't move for a long moment, memorizing the exact timbre of his voice, the casual certainty of it, the way it carried no heat or malice, just the comfortable self-assurance of a man who has never once considered that his assessments might be wrong. The worst single moment of those years, the one I returned to most often in the years that followed, the one that sat in the deepest part of my memory with the most weight, came at my high school graduation. I had finished first in AP Calculus, a quiet victory earned in the small hours of the morning while the rest of the house was asleep. And I had not expected my mother's side of the family to attend, but some still hopeful part of me had allowed the possibility. My mother did not invite a single relative, not an aunt, not a cousin, not one person from the extended network that filled the Calloway house every Christmas with noise and food and the easy warmth of people who belong to each other. She told me later that she had forgotten to send the invitations. I believed that, for years, because the alternative was a weight I was not yet ready to carry. But someone was there. In the very back row of the gymnasium, near the open side doors where the late afternoon heat was drifting in, wearing a brown canvas jacket that sat slightly too large on a frame that had grown thinner than I remembered, was my father, Dennis Lawson. He applauded when my name was called, with a steadiness and fullness that I could hear distinctly above everything around it. Not performative, just present, just complete. After the ceremony, he found me near the edge of the parking lot, and his eyes had the same light in them that I had seen on that sidewalk 10 years earlier. And he pressed a thick envelope into my hands and held them there for a moment with both of his. "I've been saving," he said quietly, his voice rough with something he was working to keep contained. "For your college. Don't tell your mother. This is for you to become whoever you are supposed to be, Mia." I held that secret for 14 years, keeping it the way you keep something sacred, carefully, quietly, away from anyone who might diminish it. Until my father died, and that secret became the center of a storm I had not seen building. I'm pausing here for just a moment, because what Dennis Lawson did, saving every single dollar he could while wearing a coat that didn't fit to his daughter's graduation, is the kind of love that deserves a like. If his sacrifice moves you the way it moves me, show it right now and subscribe, because what that envelope eventually unlocked is the reason this story exists. Now let's go back to the Tuesday morning the phone rang and changed everything. The call came at 7:04 on a cold Tuesday in February, while I was standing in my kitchen filling my first cup of coffee from the pot I always set to brew automatically the night before, a habit from graduate school that I had never stopped. The number was unfamiliar, a 310 area code I didn't recognize, and I almost let it go to voicemail the way I usually handled unknown numbers at that hour of the morning. Something made me answer. Ms. Lawson? The voice was unhurried, with the particular measured quality of someone who has spent decades in rooms where precision of language matters enormously. My name is Raymond Cross. I am an estate attorney in Westwood, and I was your father's attorney and, for many years, his closest friend. The pause that followed was the kind that carries its own weight, the kind that tells you what comes next is going to rearrange something permanent. I am so deeply sorry to have to tell you this. Dennis Lawson passed away 3 days ago. It was cardiac failure. He went in his sleep, in his house on Maple Street, surrounded by the wood he loved. The coffee cup left my hand. I watched it fall in what felt like slowed time, the ceramic shattering cleanly against the white tile floor, the dark liquid spreading outward in a shape that I stared at for several seconds without registering what I was seeing or why I was not moving to clean it up. 3 days. My father had been gone for 3 days, and I was standing in my kitchen on Vermont Avenue finding out from a stranger. Who has been notified? My voice, when it came, felt like it belonged to someone else, flat, hollow, stripped of its usual texture. Your mother was contacted by the hospital the day he passed, Raymond said carefully. She was still listed in his records as the emergency contact from their marriage. She and Mr. Calloway were both informed. Of course they were. They had known for 72 hours, 3 full days, while I answered emails and ate lunch and drove to the grocery store and came home and went to sleep, completely unaware that the man who had sacrificed the entire architecture of his own life so that I could have a future was already gone. She had the hospital's call in her hand. She had a phone with my number in it, and she chose, not out of oversight, not out of grief, but through a deliberate and calculated act of omission, to say nothing, because she was already in meetings with attorneys about the numbers. Mr. Cross, I said, gripping the counter's edge until the blood left my knuckles. Why are you calling me now? Because your father left a will, Raymond said. A very specific and very carefully prepared will. He named you as the sole heir to his entire estate. And he made me promise, made me swear, Mia, to find you first before anyone else could speak into your ear. He said, she needs to hear the truth before the wolves start circling, Raymond. And they will circle. Raymond Cross's office occupied the 3rd floor of a stately brick building near the UCLA campus in Westwood. A space fragrant with old legal volumes and the specific quiet of rooms where consequential decisions have been made for many decades. A deliberate contrast to the glass and steel towers where Marcus Calloway operated his financial empire. Raymond himself was older than his voice suggested. Silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, with the composed and slightly weathered face of someone who has watched too many families come apart over the decimal points in a bank statement, and who has made a private decision not to be surprised by it anymore. He gestured me into a deep green leather armchair and placed a thick cream-colored file on the desk between us. And I sat across from it with the quiet, particular feeling that everything I thought I understood about my own history was about to be revised. The house on Maple Street in Inglewood, the modest craftsman cottage where I had spent 2 weekends a month breathing in the smell of cedar and his strong coffee, carried a current market value of $550,000 in the Los Angeles real estate market. There was a savings account holding $180,000, investment accounts I hadn't known existed, property records for several small rental units near the USC campus. The total estate value was just under $800,000, and I sat in that green chair and could not, for a full silent minute, draw a complete breath. "That is impossible," I heard myself say quietly. My father was a craftsman. He lived on black coffee and diner food. He drove a 15-year-old truck with a cracked dashboard. He was a craftsman who sold his workshop 15 years ago and reinvested every dollar into a small portfolio of rental properties near the USC and UCLA campuses. Unglamorous, reliable, and extraordinarily consistent in their returns over time, Raymond said, his voice steady and warm. He lived simply by choice, Mia, not by necessity. He chose not to buy a new truck, or take a vacation, or renovate his kitchen, because every dollar he didn't spend on himself was a dollar he was adding to what belonged to you. He told me once, and I have returned to this many times, I would rather wear a 20-year-old jacket to her graduation than spend a single cent that belongs to her future. The tears came before I could stop them, sudden and hot. And I didn't try to stop them, sitting in that chair in Westwood, while the full, astonishing weight of what my father had quietly done settled over me like something warm and enormously heavy at the same time. Raymond then slid a second object across the desk. A sealed, cream-colored envelope, my name written on the front in my father's handwriting, steady and familiar in a way that made the grief pull sharply at my chest. He asked me to give this to you when the moment was right, Raymond said. And he asked me to tell you not to open it until the world started getting noisy. He said you would know when. The noise started within the week. The first call came from Helen Sterling, my mother's younger sister, whose voice on the phone was stretched taut with performed anxiety, the specific strain of someone delivering a message they have been given rather than one they composed themselves. "Mia, sweetheart," she said, "the whole family is heartbroken about Dennis. It's just devastating." She let the sentiment sit for exactly as long as the script required before continuing. "And we've been hearing things, darling, about the estate, about the amounts involved. And I just think it's important for you to understand that Dennis wasn't entirely, well, his thinking wasn't always the clearest in those final years. And it would be a tragedy if a decision he made in a confused moment ended up tearing this family apart over money." I held the phone and said nothing, letting the anger move through me the way heat moves through a structural beam, deep, measured, and invisible on the surface. "We think you should consider sharing what he left behind," Helen continued. "Your mother raised you. She gave years of her life. And she was his wife for 9 years. Those were his most productive years, the years when he was building what he built. Surely you can see that family has a moral claim here that goes beyond what any piece of paper says. I ended the call without responding, and within the next 48 hours, Walter Sterling called with a shorter and blunter variation of the same message, followed by 3 cousins whose last names I had to look up in my phone contacts, followed by people I hadn't spoken to since middle school who had somehow tracked down my number to remind me, with remarkable uniformity of phrasing, that Dennis would have wanted everyone to be taken care of, a claim whose internal logic depended entirely on not knowing anything about who Dennis actually was or what he had actually spent his life doing. And then, finally, Renee herself. It was a Thursday evening, the Los Angeles sky outside my window a flat and colorless gray, the kind of afternoon that feels like something is being actively suppressed. Her voice on the phone was sweet in the particular way that only very practiced people can deploy sweetness, smooth and warm at its surface, and utterly deliberate in its architecture. "Mia, sweetheart, I've been so worried about you. I know how hard this must be." She moved past my silence with the ease of someone who has spent 30 years redirecting conversations. "We need to talk about this as a family. Not through attorneys and cold paperwork, but as people who share a history. Dennis and I were married for 9 years. Those were his most important years, the years when everything he eventually built was taking shape, and I was present for all of it, supporting his work when he was still finding his footing. Surely you understand that there's a dimension to this that a legal document cannot fully capture." "The will says otherwise," I said, and my voice came out calmer than I expected. The silence on the other end lasted long enough to carry real information, and when she spoke again, the warmth had been replaced by something colder and more structural. "Saturday, 2 o'clock, at the house. Marcus and I will be there, and we are going to resolve this properly, without making a spectacle of ourselves or our family." A pause, calculated in its length. "Come with an open mind, Mia. We are the only family you have left in this world now." I'm taking a quick pause right here. If you've ever had someone use "we're your family" as a leverage point rather than a statement of love, you know exactly what Mia is carrying in this moment. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it right now, because Saturday is coming fast, and what they've arranged for that afternoon is something I need you to be here to witness. Now let's go back to what happened before that meeting even started. Before Saturday, Renee sent a late-night text requesting coffee. Just the 2 of us, like mother and daughter, to talk things through before everything gets complicated. When I arrived at a cafe in Bel Air, where the pastries come with printed cards describing their provenance, and the ambient music is designed to suggest refinement without effort, Marcus Calloway was already seated at the table, arms crossed, his expression carrying the flat, settled authority of a man who has spent 3 decades being the last word in every room he occupies. Renee gestured to the empty chair with the practiced graciousness of a woman who has hosted people in her home for 20 years, as if what she was staging were simply a pleasant catch-up between people who share a history. "Marcus wanted to be here," she said. "He's protective of me, and he worries about the legal exposure of everything. You don't mind, do you?" I minded absolutely and completely. But I sat down, because leaving would have given them something they could use. Marcus did not spend time on pleasantries. He leaned forward just enough to close the distance, his voice dropping to the register that signals finality rather than discussion. "Your father is dead, Mia," he said. "He left you money. That is a fine outcome for someone in your situation, more than most would expect. But your mother gave years of her life to raising you, while he was off living his quiet, simple existence in Inglewood. And she is entitled to a share of what he accumulated. We're proposing 70-30. You keep 30%, you walk away with a clean outcome, the family remains intact, and everyone moves on with their lives. I looked at my mother, who was studying the surface of her latte with the focused attention of someone who has decided in advance not to be present for the part of this conversation that requires meeting another person's gaze. "He left it to me," I said quietly. "That was his decision. He spent 20 years making it." "He's dead," Marcus said, and there was something almost comfortable in the directness of it, the ease of a man who has never once had to account for the impact of his own words. "The dead don't make decisions anymore. That's what the living are here for." A cold, clean clarity settled in my chest at exactly that moment. Not rage, not grief, but something harder and more durable than either. The feeling of a structure that has finally been tested and found sound. "No," I said, and the words sat in the air between us with a weight that seemed to surprise them by existing at all. "No," I said again, and I stood and walked toward the door, the cafe bell ringing with an almost ironic cheerfulness against the silence that had just formed. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape the floor. "You'll regret this, Mia." His voice followed me out into the afternoon sun, sharp enough to carry across the noise of the cafe. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You're in the big leagues now, and people who play in the big leagues without knowing the rules get crushed." I memorized those words on the drive home, repeating them quietly to myself in the slow river of the 405, storing them somewhere specific and deliberate, because I had the distinct feeling I was going to need them. What followed was not a direct confrontation, but something more insidious. A slow, methodical campaign designed to erode my stability from every direction simultaneously, carried out with the coordinated precision of people who are accustomed to getting what they want through institutional pressure. Text messages from Helen and Walter arrived with the frequency of a dripping faucet, each one slightly more guilt-laden than the last, each one carrying the same core accusation in a different emotional register. That I was destroying a family, that Dennis would be ashamed, that I was proving every unflattering thing they had always believed about me. Then a post appeared in the family's private Facebook group, long, emotionally written, with the particular polished grief of someone who had worked through several drafts, painting a portrait of a cold and calculating daughter who had manipulated a vulnerable old man to claim an inheritance that belonged to the family which had rescued her from poverty. Comments arrived in a flood, relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade attaching labels to my name that I will not repeat here. Old family friends adding their anger emoji reactions with the decisive energy of people who have been waiting for an opportunity to belong to something unified. And then the detail that landed with the heaviest impact. The post traveled widely enough through shared connections that it reached a senior project manager at my engineering firm, a colleague named Thomas, who sent me a careful, considerate message asking whether I needed personal time to handle the family situation, which told me that my professional reputation, the one thing I had built entirely by myself on a foundation no one had helped me pour, was now being touched by their reach. I screenshotted everything, every message, every post, every comment, saved in a folder on my cloud drive with the automatic efficiency of someone whose instincts are moving faster than their conscious reasoning. And somewhere behind it all, I could hear Raymond Cross's voice from our first meeting in Westwood. Your father knew they would come, and he prepared accordingly. Brooke texted me once during that period, her tone softer than her father's, but carrying the same essential message, that I was responsible for a suffering she was watching in real time, that the house felt unbearable, that she couldn't understand what I was doing or why. I typed a long and detailed response explaining everything: the years of invisibility, the footnote introductions, the coffee shop ambush, the 3 days my father spent in a hospital morgue while my mother sat in meetings with attorneys. And then I deleted it. Because the people who required that level of explanation are not the people an explanation will reach. 2 weeks of silence followed, and the silence was worse than the noise had been. In the Sterling Calloway world, silence meant that the visible campaign had been replaced by something quieter and more deliberately shaped, something that was happening in offices and on phones and in conversations I was not invited to. I had been spending my evenings at my father's house on Maple Street by that point, moving through the rooms slowly, sitting in his workshop in the late hours, letting the cedar smell and the arrangement of his tools on the wall teach me things about him I had not known when he was alive. When Renee finally called on a Wednesday afternoon, the manufactured warmth was entirely absent from her voice, replaced by something flat and transactional. The voice of a woman who has stopped performing for an audience she has decided is no longer worth performing for. "A meeting," she said. "Saturday, 2 o'clock, at the house. We're going to resolve this without destroying each other." The word lawyer appeared once in the conversation, briefly and casually embedded in a sentence built to imply that lawyers were something she hoped to avoid. And that single appearance, that one carefully controlled deployment of the word, told me everything I needed to know about what Saturday afternoon had already been organized to look like. I called Raymond Cross the moment I hung up, and he listened to the full account without interrupting, the soft rustling of papers in the background the only sound until I finished. "If she mentioned attorneys even to say she didn't want them," he said, "it means the attorneys are already confirmed. She's not inviting you to a conversation, she's inviting you to a deposition." He paused. "Go. You need to be in that room. But I will be parked 2 blocks from the house on Saturday afternoon, and if at any point you see a briefcase that doesn't belong to family, text me one word: now. I will be at the front door in under 60 seconds. That night, for the first time since Raymond had placed it in my hands, I opened my father's letter. The handwriting was slightly uneven in places, the pen pressure heavier in some lines than others, the hand of a man who had spent 40 years working with chisels and planes, making its patient and deliberate way across the page towards something it needed to say. "My dearest Mia," it began, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and the storm has arrived at your door. I always knew it would. I always knew she would come for what belongs to you, because people who measure everything by its price will always eventually come for the things that were built with love instead of money." He told me in that letter the full truth of the divorce, that Renee had threatened through her attorney to pursue a complete termination of his parental rights. No visits, no calls, no contact of any kind, unless he relinquished his share of all jointly held assets without contest. He was a woodworker with no savings and no legal resources. She had a Century City firm. I was terrified, Mia. You were 7 years old, and you were every reason I had for continuing to function. So I gave up everything, the house, the savings, every dollar I had, just to keep my 2 weekends with you, just to keep a piece of my daughter inside my life. The words blurred as I read, and I didn't try to clear my vision. I was wrong to surrender the way I did. I should have fought harder. That regret has lived in me every single day since. But I will not let you make the same mistake. I will not let you bow down to people who have never once looked at you and seen anything other than an inconvenience. The letter ended. Everything is prepared. Raymond has every document, every piece of protection I could build over 20 years. He also has something else, something your mother said when she thought no one was listening. Trust Raymond. Trust yourself. And remember what I told you on that sidewalk. I am always here. Don't let them take your dignity. That is the one thing they cannot buy back. Before we walk through those doors on Saturday, if you believe Mia is walking in ready for everything they've prepared, hit that like right now. And if you're new here, subscribe. You do not want to miss what happens inside that glass room. Now let's go back to Saturday, 1:55 in the afternoon, in the hills of Bel Air. Saturday at 1:55, I pulled over on the winding road below the Callaway house in Bel Air, a place I had spent years trying to find a way to feel at home inside, that looked now, as I sat looking up at its white walls and flawless landscaping in the hard afternoon sun, exactly like what it had always been. A set designed to project a version of American family life that had never once actually existed inside it. Raymond Cross's silver Volvo was parked 2 blocks down the hill, engine off, visible if you knew where to look. I walked up the cobblestone path in the smell of freshly cut grass and the particular silence of a house that has been deliberately composed before an event, every surface calibrated to communicate effortless belonging. The door opened before I reached it. Renee stood in the frame with the wide, practiced smile of a woman who has been greeting people in this house for 20 years, and she leaned forward with the gesture of an embrace that I did not return, my arm staying still at my sides, my expression neutral and unhurried. "Everyone's in the glass room," she said. Everyone was already there, and the room was significantly more crowded than the word family had prepared me for. Renee and Marcus occupied the main sofa with the settled, proprietary ease of people who have assigned every other seat in a room they own. Helen Sterling sat in a velvet side chair with her hands working at her bracelet, her gaze directed carefully away from mine. Walter Sterling stood by the window, with his arms folded in the posture of a man who has arrived to pass judgment. Brooke sat in the corner with her phone in her lap, her thumb entirely motionless. And seated around the long dining table, from which the usual centerpiece had been removed to accommodate stacked documents and a slim digital recorder, were 3 people I had never seen before. 2 men in perfectly fitted charcoal suits, with the controlled, unhurried bearing of attorneys who bill in 6-minute increments, and a woman with a glossy leather briefcase who sat with the organized stillness of someone who has conducted this particular kind of meeting many times and found it routine. Renee gestured with her manicured hand toward the chair at the head of the table, positioned, I noticed immediately, so that its occupant would face the entire room at once, the deliberate spatial architecture of a subject under examination. I stood behind it with my hands on the back and did not sit. "You said this was a family meeting," I said. "It is," Marcus said, his voice carrying the smooth finality of a man who has spent his career being the last word in every room. "We simply want everything properly documented. In a family with assets at this level, transparency is a form of respect." The silver-haired attorney, Mr. Stevens, who introduced himself in the measured, resonant voice of someone who charges significantly by the hour, opened a thick file with the deliberate unhurriedness of a performance, and explained, in precise and unhurried language, that they represented Renee and Marcus in matters related to the Dennis Lawson estate, and that they had gathered substantial reason to believe that the will designating me as sole beneficiary was legally contestable on the grounds of the testator's mental incapacity at the time of drafting. The second attorney, Martinez, leaned forward with the alert expression of someone counting every variable in real time, and noted that they had witnesses prepared to testify to a documented pattern of cognitive confusion in my father's final years, including testimony from family members who had spent time with him. Helen shifted in her velvet chair and remained focused on her lap. Martinez then outlined, smoothly and without apparent discomfort, the projected timeline and cost of a California probate proceeding, 3 to 5 years, with legal fees historically consuming 40 to 60% of a contested estate before any judgment, and concluded that no one in the room would benefit from that outcome, particularly me. Stevens then pushed a document across the polished table with both hands, heavy cream-colored paper, formal typography, the words, "Voluntary Renunciation of Inheritance Rights," printed in bold at the top, and explained that the proposed settlement assigned 80% of the estate to my mother, with 20% retained by me, a clean and private resolution that preserved everyone's dignity. 80%. At the cafe, it had been 70. The price of my cooperation had decreased in direct proportion to their confidence that I had arrived without resources. I looked at the document for a long, quiet moment without touching it. Then I looked at the room. Marcus's controlled satisfaction, Renee's careful and expectant composure, the relatives who had turned my childhood into a sustained lesson in the geography of irrelevance, the lawyers arrayed with their documents and their recorder and their professional certainty. They had prepared everything: legal strategy, familial pressure, psychological architecture, a room designed to produce one specific outcome. They had planned for everything, except the man sitting in the silver car 2 blocks down the hill. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. "I'd like a second opinion," I said, and my voice was steady in a way that I could feel unsettling them, and I typed the single word and pressed send. Marcus laughed, a short, reflexive sound that carried genuine contempt. "Who are you texting? There is no one coming to help you in this room, Mia. You walked in here alone." "I'm not certain that's accurate," I said. The 2 minutes that followed were the quietest I have ever experienced inside those walls, a silence so complete and so charged that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen down the hall, the distant murmur of a leaf blower 2 properties away. Stevens and Martinez exchanged a fast, private glance. Renee's smile began to lose its coherence at the edges. And then the doorbell rang. A clean, decisive tone that cut through the room like something physical, and everyone became very still. I walked to the front door before anyone else could rise, and I opened it, and Raymond Cross was standing on the porch in a charcoal gray suit that made the other attorney's attire look like it had been selected from a department store rack, his briefcase in one hand, his expression carrying the absolute, unhurried calm of someone who has been preparing for this specific Saturday afternoon for 23 years. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice filling the hallway and carrying easily into the glass room. "I hope I haven't interrupted anything important." He walked past me with the natural authority of someone who belongs in every room he enters, and the effect on the room was immediate and structural. Stevens straightened in his chair, his professional composure visibly recalibrating. Martinez's confident expression underwent a rapid revision. Renee's face shifted toward something pale and uncertain. "My name is Raymond Cross," Raymond said, placing his briefcase on the coffee table and opening it with the decisive, surgical sound of a man who has arrived at the moment he was built for. "I am a licensed estate attorney in the state of California, and I have represented Dennis Lawson's personal, professional, and testamentary interests for the past 23 years. I currently represent his daughter, Mia Lawson, in all matters related to his estate, and in certain civil liability actions I am prepared to discuss at whatever level of detail this group requires." He produced the psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Patricia Morrison, a board-certified neuropsychologist at UCLA Medical Center. The assessment, conducted 8 weeks before my father's death, comprehensive in its scope, unambiguous in its conclusion. Dennis Lawson was fully cognitively competent, possessed of above-average executive function and abstract reasoning, and entirely capable of making sound legal and financial decisions. He looked at Helen Sterling with the level, patient gaze of someone who has already decided the outcome. "Any witness you bring to challenge the will's validity will be cross-examined against this document, and against the testimony of a UCLA-affiliated physician whose professional reputation is beyond challenge in any California probate court. I would estimate, with reasonable confidence, that such a cross-examination would arrive at the word perjury in approximately 4 minutes." Helen became very focused on her bracelet. Raymond continued with the methodical rhythm of someone laying down a hand of cards assembled over decades. The will, drafted in full compliance with California Probate Code Section 6110, witnessed independently, notarized by a certified third party, with a video record of the signing ceremony that Raymond had personally supervised. A countersuit filing fully prepared for frivolous litigation and malicious interference with inheritance rights. And then, the silver USB drive placed at the center of the table with a small and deliberate 47 text messages, 23 recorded phone calls, 15 social media posts, constituting a documented and traceable campaign of harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, attributable to individuals currently present in the room. He cited the California Civil Code sections one by one in the even, unhurried tone of a man reading items off a list. He noted that if the matter proceeded to litigation, full discovery would be requested: phone records, private correspondence, bank communications, the complete digital history of everyone in the room from the date of my father's death forward. And then, in a voice that had dropped by a full register and was now carrying the particular weight of a statement that is not a threat, but simply a fact, he looked directly at Renee and told the room that Arthur, Dennis, had preserved recordings from 2001, including a conversation in which Renee Sterling had explicitly threatened to pursue a complete termination of his parental rights unless he relinquished his share of all jointly held marital assets without contest. The sound Renee made was not a word. It was sharper and more involuntary than that. The sound of a carefully maintained structure reaching its limit. Stevens was already gathering his documents with the brisk efficiency of someone departing a scene before photographs are taken. "Mrs. Calloway will be in contact," he said, to no one in particular, and he and Martinez left without handshakes, the front door closing behind them with a sound that echoed through the house like the closing of something that would not be reopened. The room that remained was very quiet. Marcus brought his hand down on the table once, not a deliberate gesture, just the release of a man who doesn't know what to do with his rage when it has nowhere left to travel. Renee sat with a silk handkerchief pressed against her mouth, staring at the surface of the mahogany table. Raymond closed his briefcase with a clean and final, "I believe we're finished here," he said, and he stood and buttoned his jacket with the unhurried composure of a man who has already moved on to what comes next. And for the first time in 20 years, the silence in the Calloway house belonged entirely to me. The 2 weeks that followed were a false and suffocating calm. No calls, no messages, no further Facebook posts. A stillness that felt less like resolution than like the specific, ionized quiet that settles in before something catastrophic arrives. I had been spending my nights at my father's house on Maple Street by then, sleeping in the small back bedroom, moving through his workshop in the evenings with a slowness that felt like ceremony, returning each tool to its place on the wall, clearing the sawdust from the workbench's surface with my hands, breathing in the cedar and linseed oil that I was already beginning to be afraid I would eventually forget. Then, at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, the security system Raymond had insisted on installing when I began staying there sent an alert to my phone. Motion detected on the porch. And I opened the live camera feed to see 2 figures in dark hoodies moving across the front porch in the infrared glow. One of them carrying a red plastic container whose purpose I understood immediately, completely, and with a cold, full-body clarity that moved faster than any conscious thought. I watched the liquid being poured along the railing and across the front steps, soaking into the wood of the porch my father had built and repaired and maintained for 30 years. And then the lighter flickered, and the porch erupted into orange and yellow at the precise moment I was already dialing 911. And then, before the fire could travel from the railing toward the window frames, the industrial sprinkler system my father had installed under the eaves after a brush fire came close to the hill many years earlier, activated with a pressurized hiss, and drenched the porch completely, extinguishing the fire before it could reach the structure of the house. The 2 figures stood motionless in the artificial downpour for a moment, then ran toward a black Ford F-150 parked half a block down the street, its license plate fully visible and clearly captured in the security camera's field of view. The police arrived in 7 minutes. Detective James Cole from the LAPD's Arson and Property Crimes Division met me at the station at 4:30 in the morning, with the steady, slightly worn composure of a man who has been called to other people's family disasters more times than he can accurately count. He opened his file on the table without preamble. "We picked up 2 individuals at a residence in Bel Air," he said. "Marcus Calloway and Renee Calloway. His clothing tested positive for accelerants. Her phone contained deleted messages showing her mapping the patrol schedule for the private security service that covers your block." I sat with my mother's name in an arson report for a long moment, with the image of her carefully deleted messages, the mechanical precision with which she had helped calculate the timing of an attempt to burn down the last physical thing my father had ever left me. The trial ran for 4 months, loud, detailed, and ultimately undeniable. Security footage, accelerant test results, gas receipts traced to Marcus's credit card, a neighbor who had photographed the truck. Marcus Calloway received 10 years for arson and criminal conspiracy. Renee Calloway received 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3. As the sentences were read, she turned from the defendant's table and looked at me across the courtroom with the expression of a woman who has exhausted every available instrument and is attempting the last one she has. 3 words delivered with the flat certainty of someone who believes them. "You will regret this." I held her gaze, and I did not blink, and I did not respond. And I watched the officer lead her out And then I looked at the floor and took a full, quiet breath. If you've been here for this entire story, if you felt every single thing Mia carried from the beginning to this moment, drop one word in the comments that describes what you're feeling right now. And a like and a subscription means more than I can say, because what comes next is the part of the story I most need you to hear. Let's go home. A year has passed since the world came apart and then rebuilt itself, stronger and more honestly, from the wreckage. I live in my father's house on Maple Street now, our house, and I have kept his workshop exactly as he left it, his tools hanging in their rows above the workbench where he spent 30 years building things with his hands for other people, and simultaneously, in the patient and private way of a man who trusted time, building something for me. Some nights I sit in his workshop chair in the dark with a cup of coffee and just stay there in the cedar smell and the sawdust quiet, not speaking, not asking anything of the silence, just keeping the space company, the way you keep company with a presence that is no longer there, but that has not entirely finished being present. 6 months after the trial, Raymond called me and asked me to meet him at the workshop. He stood in front of the built-in bookshelf along the east wall and pressed a recessed latch I had walked past 100 times without noticing, and a panel swung open to reveal a cavity in the wall. And inside the cavity was a hand-carved wooden box, polished to a deep, warm grain, the kind of object that takes months of patient and deliberate work to produce properly. The kind of work a man does when he believes with his whole body that what he is making matters. He spent 3 months on this, Raymond said quietly. He told me it was the most important piece of work he had ever done. I lifted the lid with hands that were not entirely steady. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning more than 2 decades, and every single one of them was a moment from my life that I had believed, completely and without question, that he had missed. Me at 12, holding my district math competition trophy in the school gymnasium, my face still slightly disbelieving. Me at 18 in my graduation gown, squinting in the afternoon sun outside the gymnasium doors. Me at 25, walking through the glass doors of my first engineering firm on my first morning of work, entirely unaware of the car that had been parked across the street for several hours. On the back of each photograph was a line in his handwriting, steady and patient and entirely his. Mia, 12. 3rd row, left side, near the exit. You were brilliant and you didn't even know it yet. Mia, 25. I drove 2.5 hours in traffic just to watch you walk through that door. My daughter, a structural engineer. The last photograph was of me standing on the front porch of the house on Maple Street, taken in the early evening light some weeks before he died. My face turned slightly toward the street, unaware of the camera, the light settling around me in a way that looked, in the photograph, almost like something deliberate. The message on the back read, "Money is just paper, sweetheart. These moments, this is the real thing I was building. Proof that I was always there, that I never stopped watching, never stopped loving, never missed a single day that mattered. You are a Lawson. Stand strong, and know that everything I ever did, every dollar I ever saved, and every choice I ever made, I did for the girl standing on that porch." I held the box against my chest for a long time and let the last of the grief move through me and pass, the way a storm moves through a city and leaves the air clean and different afterward. The money is managed by Raymond's firm, a safety net I hope will never need to be used. Brooke Calloway texts occasionally. She is in therapy now, doing the difficult and honest work of understanding what she was raised inside and what it cost her, and I have a quiet and genuine respect for the courage that requires. We are not sisters, but we have arrived at something that is not nothing, and that is more than I expected. Renee's letters arrive from the correctional facility every few weeks, and I keep them in the same drawer where I once kept my father's sealed envelope, and I do not open them. That is not cruelty. It is a boundary. Not a wall constructed to punish someone, but a door installed to give me the right to choose who walks through it. I used to believe that family was forever and unconditional regardless of the damage, because that was the lesson embedded in every year I spent in that house on the hill, trying to earn a seat at a table that had never been set for me. My father taught me something truer over the course of 30 years of quiet, consistent, entirely unglamorous, and absolutely complete love. He taught me that the people who deserve to walk through your door are the ones who have earned it. Not through blood or proximity or the legal fact of having occupied the same structure, but through the daily, patient, unhurried decision to show up for you, even when you can't see them doing it, even when they are sitting in the third row near the exit, even when they are parked across the street from a glass door you are about to walk through for the first time, watching with everything they have. He showed up for me at every important moment of my life and never once told me. He showed up in the back row and the parking lot and the street outside the glass door and the sealed envelope and the wooden box and the sprinkler system and the 23 years of legal preparation that waited patiently for a Saturday afternoon in Bel Air. He showed up for me every single day of his life. And he left me a fortress built from 30 years of sawdust and restraint and love. And when the wolves came for it, the fortress held. If this story reminded you of someone who loved you from a distance, quietly and completely, without ever asking for anything in return, drop their name in the comments, or just the single word they deserve. And if you stayed here all the way to the end, a like and a subscription is the best way to tell me this story was worth telling. I'll see you in the next one.